Hello and welcome to today's for entertainment only, not intended to instruct or advise. Don't try this at home. Video relative to Mr. Stoner's contribution to the modern sporting rifle. Now, I don't think there's anything really new in this particular video. All things herein contained are available elsewhere in various videos on the internet and with instructions on various products that may be seen within. However, what this video does is show an entertaining look at an out-of-the-box unit that has had a number of the little common tweaks like a soft, rubbery, cushiony grip added to it, which, by the way, is the first part of this video. So let's roll the intro and get on with it. First thing that needs to be done is to clear the weapon. And I'm going to look and I can see that there is no magazine in the weapon. I'm going to keep the muzzle pointed in the safe direction. I'm going to pull the charging handle back. I'm going to inspect the chamber. I can see that there is no cartridge in the weapon. I'm going to release the charging handle, and I think for this operation, since this is a pre-scoped weapon, I think I don't want to bang it around. I'm going to press down the takedown pin, and I'm going to press down the pivot pin, which should separate the upper and lower receivers. Now, to replace a hard plastic factory original handle with a soft, cushiony grip version like this is not difficult, but there is some liability associated with it in that, let me get the parts out, in that the fire control selector has a spring which is housed within the grip. There's a hole in that grip, and that's where the spring goes. And I am doing this on white newsprint on a hard surface, on a hardwood floor, to make sure that should I have the spring get loose on me, I can find it. I'm not going to damage, bend, spindle, mutilate said spring, because boogering it up may cause the fire selector to not work when I put a weapon on safe, I expect it to stay on safe. I think that's a reasonable assumption. So it exists right in this location. Again, you can look at the new grip and see that's where it is. I'm going to look down here, take the screw loose, and there it comes off. And you see that spring? That is the fire control selector spring. I'm going to take it out, put it immediately into the grip. I'm going to set the grip down. With this particular grip comes a little piece of rubber, and this has got a flat piece here. They make curved one. I would recommend to the person who owns this, if they're going to do any hunting with this and have a gloved hand that it might be more convenient to have a curved trigger guard bottom there. Now, I didn't move the receiver because I'll put a picture up here. The detent pin is in there and I don't want to lose it. I'm going to push out the screw that came with the unit. I'm going to do a quick comparison. They look like they're the same length, so close enough to it. And I'm going to hold the spring in place with my finger. Just a little bit of friction. There we go. Now I'm going to slide the soft rubber grip up, guiding, looking and making sure that my fire safety control spring feeds properly into the hole. Now I can turn the grip up, the receiver up. Tighten that down. Fire control selector is working properly. I'll place the little bottom guard on. And that completes that particular operation. This weapon did not come with provisions for a 2-point harness. So in order to put a harness on it, the most logical thing to do is use a single point harness, which requires the installation of a single point adapter. These are made different styles. This is just an inexpensive one. One side of this will have, the receiver side will have a detent, or the bump is on the receiver side. It'll have 1 or 2 holes for clipping the single point harness on, or it'll be where you can put a quick detach on it, depending on the brand and style, or it may even have just a loop across the back, depending on the brand. It replaces this stock piece here. And I think for convenience and ease, I'm going to remove the stock. This is not technically difficult, but it takes a little bit of skill making sure you don't shoot pieces, parts across the room. The buffer tube retainer, there's a little pin that pokes up which stops this from coming forward. There's nothing keeping it in place except for the interference of this tube. So when we remove the castle nut, pulling this back so that we can unscrew it, this will eventually shoot across the room if we don't catch it. And it is held in place by the edge of that tube. So it's spring loaded. To make matters just a little bit more complicated, the takedown detent spring is underneath this piece. So we don't want to spin this around without having made provisions for it. So the first thing I'm going to do is got to take this using this AR tool, or some people call it a spanner or a castle nut tool, AR tool. Okay. Now I'm going to hold down on the plate, turning the castle nut back. Now I'm going to let the plate work back gently. And I am going to be very mindful of this spring, and I'm going to turn it just gently, just enough so that the spring is released. See how small that spring is? Now, the next operation requires me to hold down, push the buffer tube back, put my thumb over that pin, and unscrew the tube. When I get it back a few turns, I can push back with a finger and remove the retainer and its spring. Now I can take that out, the spring, the buffer. Now it takes a lot of the hard work. I can take the tube off. Now see how this got the detent in it? Slide that off. Place that on, making sure the key goes into the groove. Making sure I don't ruin the receiver and cross thread it. Boy, would he be pissed. Okay, got that started. Now, you see the edge of that tube is what catches the buffer. So I'm going to get it close to going in where I can still see the edge of the hole. I'm going to slide the buffer back in there. Going to slide the spring back into the retainer. Put the retainer back into its position. And now, to make sure I don't screw too far, I have to pull it back and then look to see if I've got that captured. And I have it just the correct number of times. So I'm right there at that space, but I don't have my detent spring in place. So I need to rotate that back. You see that? I'm going to place it back down in the hole using my little thin gauge. I'm going to try to compress that down, rotate the tube, and now I get it in position. I'm able to tighten the castle nut back up. It's just finger tight at this point while I check my position. Detent in. Check my working of the spring. Yep. I can hear and feel the takedown detent still work. And with my finger over the retainer, yep, push that back. And I can see that it is in fact held in place properly. So now with that done, I'm going to probably take this out of frame. And that's it. Let's place the upper and lower receivers have been combined and the rifle is complete. Now, if one notices, the mounting height of the scope is fairly similar to that of a standard bolt action rifle, which is fine for shooting, very comfortable, rather than the elevated version of like an A2. But it can make access to the charging handle a little more difficult. Little, it's still very doable, but it's maybe not as comfortable as we might like. There is a solution to that in a purchase of a different charging handle. Let me remove the bolt carrier group. Here is an aftermarket. You take it out. This is a medium length handle. It adds just a little bit more leverage to that. And if we look, the way it's designed is it backs up and has a mechanical stop at that point, so that when you're pulling it back, you actually stop against something rather than this type of action, which puts all the pressure directly on the pin. And it's absolutely no trouble to put this in. Slide it up into the receiver. I think this was less than $50. Put the bolt carrier group back in. And the access to it is much faster, easier to do with a gloved hand. Very simple to do. Just a change out of a purchased part. The particular manufacturer makes that in a small, a medium, and a large. And that seems to be just about ideal. Now, the addition of the single point sling, the tactical sling as people often refer to them, may be comfortable for certain positions, but it may be less desirable by some. This particular firearm has no provisions for a two-point sling, but that's really no reason to be held back. You can find online, if your stock didn't come with one, you can find just the rear piece. And there are a number of manufacturers who make front swivels, but this is an interesting piece. This is called a vent hole mount, and it may be known by different names for different manufacturers. But what this does is, if we take off the bottom half of the furniture, it mounts to the hole here. Now, these delta rings can be kind of cumbersome to get off on camera, and I'm not going to fiddle with it. It's a little bit tight. To get the top piece off, I actually have to demount the scope, and I don't want to mess this guy up. But we'll pull this off, and then we'll look in there. We'll have to remove the heat shield, the aluminum heat shield that's on the bottom of it. Now with the front furniture removed, you'll see it's got the little heat shield in there, and we just need to gently release that. And this little hardware here just screws on. This goes from underneath. And that should fit down in the hole right here. Now, before I tighten it all the way down, I'm going to add a little bit of Loctite. Put the heat shield back. And we have the rear to do. This particular piece was bought for, what'd you say, $1.99? The threads feel like they're cut a little bit sloppily, but it's basically nothing more than put a little Loctite in it just to lock it up. Loctite is actually a brand name, a famous thread locking compound, we should say. So all there is to that. Now, when it comes to what type of sling you might want to put on, this is just a piece of webbing, 1-inch webbing. These are 1.25 inches. These are, or you might get a conventional sling such as this. And the way this one is made, you can take the piece apart to put on the back. And we will pick one. I think no heavier than the gun is. I think we'll put the pre-made version on. Welcome to the part of the show where I remind you this show is not intended to advise, only to entertain. Now we took a little break and we viewed the previous shot segments and we checked the lighting, and we found that quite honestly, despite our best effort, the auto white balance had the better of us with these nice black guns. So we reset the lights and the camera. We're going to take it off the crane and shoot it from a different location, and we're going to see if we can make the next one maybe a little bit better. I think we can fix it in production. But the next little segment is going to be putting a enhanced trigger guard on the AR lower receiver. And it by itself is not technically difficult, but you can ricky it up pretty quick if you break the ears off of the receiver. Now, one end of the front end of the standard mil-spec trigger guard is actually pinned with a spring pin. If you push it up, it'll actually drop down. And what Mr. Stoner was thinking when he came up with this design, I don't really know, but the idea was that you could drop it out of the way and you'd have plenty of room for a glove. And I guess a big mitten or something would fit in there with no trigger guard at all. But you have to have something small to push up and activate that pin. And it's flat otherwise, which actually when you take the hand grip off, it helps it stand up, and there's some features of that. But a lot of people, if you hunt with this gun, this style of gun in sort of the fall or the early winter, you might find it's maybe needs a little bit more room. Now, I'm not giving a plug to this, but I noticed that on the new Ruger, the 2014 release of the Ruger 556, and I don't know if it has an E or whatever on it, but they have a new unit out. I think it's at the retail around $750. My local guy, Gun Guru, has them available at $650. I've seen them as low as $599 on special. And they, Ruger, the people at Ruger, went ahead and put a curved trigger guard, which saves people a lot of time. Now this is an aluminum mil-spec receiver, and I've got an aftermarket kind of non-mil-spec piece here. The problem is not breaking the ears off. And I surfed YouTube just to see what was out there, and I've seen some people just banging on them unsupported and using, oh, you got to use center pin punches, and you can use whatever you want to. It's yours. I'm not advising you to do anything. For me, I would punch, as I have this receiver. I got a block. Now this happens to be what's known as a rock oak, which is a type of red oak that grew up on the ridge, and one got hit by lightning. I took it down. This has been drying for about 7 years, and I cut a little block of wood like you would a barrel block or something like that. Have a big hole and a little hole, and quite honestly I prefer small holes. And it fits right up under this, and we'll reposition the camera to show the support of it. But what I use it for is I use it to slide up underneath the ear, support it, and then gently tap it out with a light hammer. And you remove the roll pin, which is 1/8 roll pin. And the thickness of this block I have is about 7/8, because that's what it's playing down to. I needed something thicker than the pin, and I'll put a picture up right about now to illustrate it. And this needs to be, in my estimation, thicker than the pin, so that the pin can clear when you use your pin punch. And you need to use an appropriate size pin punch. You don't want to be dragging the sides or anything like that. Now the weak spot on the receiver is going to be this part, these little ears right here that are pinched. And I can spin this around, I think, and show you that this pivots out. Now I've already taken the pin out of this side, and I think I can go ahead and pull this out without having to take the handle off. But the way, can you see how these ears are just put out here? Now if you break one off, the housing, the blank receiver, right now the cheapest ones I found are about $45 American, and they're available. But to buy one just by itself, this is the piece with the serial number, and as it results, this takes about a $30 FFL transfer fee, plus the background check, plus the piece. So you're pushing possibly close to $100 just to get a new piece in the time it takes. And that's for an inexpensive mil-spec version. And that's assuming that all your bits, that you're capable of taking them out and transferring them to the new lower receiver, stripped lower receiver, and that you have the tools to do it, like they use the castle nut tool back here. So I cut a block. This block is that piece of oak, or rock oak, it's just a sturdy piece of wood, 7/8. And I have a hole located so that it lined up, and I can flip it over and use the big hole if I was afraid I wasn't going to line up. And it just sat right there. Now this is unsupported, so I just take a simple grocery tote or bin bag, garbage bag, something like that. So it just balances, takes the weight off, and then I could take the regular pin punch. This is 1/8, and it fits inside of the thing, and just gently tack it down. Now, I didn't whack it, didn't hit it hard, just sort of gentle, short, sharp shocks just to get it moving, nothing really too hard. Because again, you break it, you ruin it, and there's not much way to fix it. So this piece is just a about around $20 or so. And when I inspect it, one side has threads. When I went to buy this online, I read where some people said, well, it'd be real nice if they threaded the piece, and maybe they didn't. But one side is not threaded, one side is. So this side, before I put it in there, I noticed it's got threads in it. So that I know is the front side, this is the back side, and then I'm going to put the pin in. But I'm going to use my old pin because I know it fit in there, and as I look the shape of it, I can see it's been fit in here before. Put it back in and get it started. Got that captured. Now I'm going to flip it over before I drive it the rest of the way. I'm going to put my screw in and then come back and complete this. And I'm not going to drive the edge I just put right there with the edge of that hammer in. I'm going to leave it actually exposed just a little bit, as that's the way the manufacturer sent it in, and it's not going to hurt a thing. Oh, fudge! I made you look. It's perfectly fine. But with just a little bit of a violent hammer, we could have a major catastrophe and really bugger that up. But that's all there is to it. Gives just a little bit more finger space therein. So that concludes that portion of it. And as you may notice, on this, we have painted the fire in the safe. And that leads us a nice segue into the next portion. Now, some people may prefer putting a little paint on the receiver or upper part of the barrel or something like that. And it's not very difficult to do. I also toured the YouTubeverse to see if this was even something that needed to be done. And I must confess I was quite confused by some of the things that are out there. People talk about using crayons or wax or fingernail polish, and then some of them were using something like model airplane, car model type of little enamel paints, which is a reasonable thing to do because they just use paint in factories when they paint these things over, and they're readily available and in small amounts, and they're fairly adhesive and the solvents available. But then some of the things that just confused like the living daylights on me, people were using nail polish remover on enamel paints. And I was like, why are these people doing this? I am confused. And then someone else said, well, don't use that. Use acetone free. And I'm still thinking in my little brain, why are you using nail polish remover with enamel paints instead of a paint thinner, which is actually made for that particular product? And of course, the option may be that it might mess up the finish, but an oxidized finish such as these metals are highly unlikely, not within my knowledge that I know about, but then I don't know at all, do I? So the question existed. And then it just dawned on me, monkey see, monkey do. And if the previous video used fingernail polish to remove a nail polish paint job, well, then it only makes sense that they would use fingernail polish remover to remove the next thing they try to use. Now, what I would use were I doing this is I would use a oil removing solvent, something like 91% isopropyl alcohol. I wouldn't use something like an ammonia-based thing like a Windex or something like that, because I don't want to put something that's potentially corrosive on metal. And as far as paint thinner as a cleaner, if I was concerned about that, what I would do is I would take something like a cotton swab and I would test in an unseen area, something I could touch up here or inside this portion or somewhere, possibly even in the edge of something or underneath the handle. And I would test it to see, does the paint thinner deface the finish of the unit? Finding out that it possibly didn't, then I might want to get froggy and jump ahead. Now, for paint application, one might try something like the little micro brushes. Here's what are they, 10 little baby brushes for $2. Or we can do what I did, is I just use a good old-fashioned toothpick. And with the old toothpick, because I only need a little bit, after I clean off the affected area, just get it in there, brush over just enough, kind of let it sit, take something convenient, what is handy, like a gun patch, and go across, get the bulk of it off, and then kind of let it dry, maybe take a dry swab and kind of clean up the bulk, and then just let the little bit that's excess dry. Give it about 10-15 minutes, and then I can come back with a little bit of paint thinner, kind of clean that up, let that dry just a little bit, and just kind of touch it up the rest of the way. Something like this, using 2 different colors, take a little bit of electrical tape that's not going to mar it, tape off the other bits. In the case of the fire selector, just take this fire selector pin, detent pin out, take the whole piece out, and do it separately. You can do both sides that way. So that's how that works. Now, actually, the company logo is right here. The serial number, model number, that stuff wasn't done, but the logo is, and it turned out real well. But they're not sponsoring, so I don't use people's names kind of without due recourse. And you know, just a little bit of white there, the fire safety, and that looks, I think, fairly nice without, you know, getting too poncy. And I guess we'll proceed on. Well, we didn't get this video wrapped up when the CASHA staff suggested that you guys probably would actually like to see paint being done rather than just a description of it. And I explained, well, I just really don't have anything need to be painted. Well, one of them went back and dug out an old little black barrel that we can do. So they thought it'd be a good idea if, you know, before we posted the video, put it all together, if we put this in. So I guess we can do it. I mean, if this is something you want, but for me, I thought there's probably enough videos on this already out there. So, yeah, I guess let's do it. All right, the first thing that we need to do is potentially degrease, although but looking by the rust on this barrel, it hasn't seen any oil for a while. I'm using this 91% alcohol. I have some electrical tape just right up underneath this portion of the barrel just to keep the paint from maybe eking up underneath the rail, the scope mount. And I'm going to do both sides. A little nappy. Get that dried off. Throw that aside. Better get a few more. I'm about out of. Okay, let's get this thing started. Now what I have done to this point, took a little bit of this electrical tape and I've taped off above and below the writing on both sides. And we use a little bit for masking. Now, and of course I wiped off a little bit of 91% isopropyl alcohol to take off any residual oil. And by the looks of the amount of rust what was on that barrel, I don't have a particular fear that there was a lot of oil on that barrel. Now what I'm going to do here, because this is such a extravagant firearm what I got here, I'm going to take some of this paint thinner for this enamel paint and do what I recommend, do a little bit of testing, see if I get any of that finish off, and all I'm getting is rust. So I'm going to think that I'm going to be safe with my paint thinner when it comes time to take the last little layer off. Now let's see, let me get a clean toothpick. All right, let me get some of this white paint. And I'm going to dip this in. I'm just going to try to kind of try to scrape as much off of the surface and get as much down in the actual imprint stamping as it was. And this isn't exactly super deep stamping, but I'm going to see what we can do with it. Look like this tape's a little bit in the way right there. But we're going to get it just as good as a demonstration need to be, I guess. And then I'm going to take just a little bit of Q-tip just to kind of get to see that right there. The stamp looked like it just almost didn't make the bottom of that RIMFIRE. So I'm going to flip that over on that side. We're going to do this side. The deeper and more pronounced your lettering is, the better this is going to work. Now this is pretty shallow on this side. This doesn't look like a very good piece to demonstrate on, but we'll give it a shot. the text just isn't very deep. All right, now we're going to set this and let this dry about 15 minutes. And hopefully when we come back with the paint thinner, it will be dry deep enough in the groove that we'll be in good shape for taking that light little bit on the barrel off. Okay, what do you say if we go ahead and work on doing some initial cleanup of the letter and take the tape off and start polishing down the excess paint and reposition the camera. Well, that looks like that is about as good as it's going to get. Let's see if we can swing that around just a little bit more. Now, I don't know, let me take that down. I don't know if you can see very well in this lighting, and with a small monitor I can't really tell. But right here at the rim fire, it's actually not stamped. It's just that shallow. But overall, that's really not too bad for, you know, no more effort than what it takes to do it. The other side is even more shallow. There's just, it's hardly even struck on that side of the barrel. But it took some paint. Now, and you can always go back and retry it, relayer it in there. But when you feel over it, it's just really just smooth. I mean, you've got to have some grooves for the paint to fall into. I think I've got a, you know, some depth of some stamping to work from. But if you look right at the edge, if I get that right there, you see, with that reflection, it's just not struck into the barrel. But that gives you an idea of the painting process. There just ain't much to it, really. Just really not much to it. Now, in this final portion of this reset shoot, the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to change out the flash hider with a little bit different design. Now, this particular kind of style is longer. Let me just, and I've got this one loose. This is the standard A2. And I cheated because it can be a bit of a booger get one off. And if you're trying to get a flash hider off that's been set, you might want to try a little liquid wrench or WD-40 or some kind of a penetrating oil to spray up under here before you try to break it loose with your typical tool. Now, for those, it's pretty common information. This is, people sometimes call this a bird cage or a standard A2. It's because it looks much like jailbird bars on a bird cage. The other side, what makes them sort of difficult sometimes is the fact that the bottom of it is solid. And that was for so that if you do a lot of, in battlefield, shooting low toward the ground, and you have the flash hider down on the ground, the escaping gases are blown out like this. It's not so much to be a muzzle brake kind of action, but it's so that the gases don't blow down on the bottom and kick a bunch of dirt and dust in your eyes. As it happens, the user is not going to probably be doing a lot of shooting laying with his little belly in the grass. I suspect he's getting a little too old for that mess. So now this one This design is symmetrical all the way around, and what it basically is four slightly helically progressing grooves with an open end. So it sort of looks like four fingers, and so there's no end of the bird cage for the gases to run up against. And being a little bit longer, it seems to be a little bit more effective. Now, which means you don't have to orient this at any particular torque or position. This is the little crush washer, and there's about two different ways that you align one of these on the end of a firearm. One is with basically laminated washers. They're real thin, and you just kind of peel off to make it thinner and thinner and thinner till you get exactly the final rotation of the directional flash hider that you need, which can be a bit of a pain in the bottom. But this, the way this design is done, is it is unnecessary. And if I've got enough screw threads, it should just back straight up against the edge of the barrel. Just like that. And it's just a little bit more effective, the style. You lose the ability to lay one's bottom in grass, because when you do, I've actually got a groove right here which is going to blow dirt up. But the four longer grooves help make maybe that little longer burning powder not show up as much. So that's about all there is to that. It's completely unnecessary. It might be desirable just for a little bit of ease, or to be a little bit more unique, a little bit different. They're not very expensive. And that concludes about all the little tweaks that this particular firearm needs at this time. If there are any more, we'll add to it.